Good evening. This is going to be a quick first video, I think, because who knew doing this at night that lighting is such an issue. I end up being very white, but I needed to get at least a little bit of light onto this piece, and I've got a big honking light ring going, but the house is pretty dark. So I did want to jump on though and kind of outline a little bit about what's happening with this piece. I'm calling it the Ugly Duckling because I think even on Facebook when I was posting it, that most people are in agreement that it's not the most attractive little cabinet. Now, it is quite nice inside. This is all cedar lined. It's in great shape. So the bones of it are great. Just the style and the finish is really pretty outdated, which means this was a piece that left untouched. Nobody was going to love. And I'm trying to see about joining myself here on the page so that I can see comments if it happens, because these lights are so bright. There is no way that I can see anything. And I have to move in too far. Hi, Colleen. So it's kind of crazy, but I wanted to do a couple of things. So I wanted to start by giving you a bit of an idea of some of the prep that goes into this, and I am going to try and do up a little article. So I'll have that onto the blog. And oh, Linda and Colleen, hi guys. So with a piece like this, you've got a couple of options. I mean, I know that usually the paints that I'm using say no prep, right? You hear that about the clay-based paints, you hear that about the chalk paints, and typically that's maybe true, but that doesn't mean you can get away with everything that you want to get away with. So first of all, you always have to clean the piece really well. Some of these pieces that I get have been sitting in people's garages forever, or in back sheds or basements, and not everybody has nice looking basements, trust me, as I go to haul some of this stuff out. So definitely cleaning really well. I typically don't use a lot of harsh chemicals or cleaning fluids on them. It kind of detracts from the fact that I'm also using a lot of paints without a lot of harmful chemicals too. So usually I will mix up a big bucket of warm water with vinegar. So almost a 50-50 mix. And usually I've got a little bit of the Blue Dawn dish detergent in there as well to cut some of the grease. So I will wash the piece until that water always comes through clear. So I will often have to dump it out, refill it with clean liquid, clean water again, clean cloth, and go at a piece again. This one wasn't so bad. Some have been absolutely disgusting. So I will always clean the piece first. I don't do a lot of prep work with sanding ahead of time. Let me see if I can get myself online here. So I don't typically do a lot of sanding up front, mostly because I hate it, and also because I'm usually refinishing in the middle of my living room, and that's not always the most convenient thing to do, right? That I've got all the sanding fluid going all over the place. So what, oh, there we go. Kind of weird seeing myself on the screen. So this piece as well, because it's got so much detail in all of the moldings and things, it's not going to be very helpful trying to sand it. That's not going to be very easy to be able to do. You could use, but because it's kind of a slick surface, this wood is kind of slick, it really needed something. Just painting over it, you're really risking the paint scratching a little bit too easily, especially before it's fully cured. So I didn't want to have to sand inside the house again. I just barely got it cleaned up from the last piece that I was sanding in here. You could use a deglosser, which is kind of a liquid sanding medium if you want, and then again wash that all off, rinse it until that's all clean. But again, a little bit more work than I wanted. So what I did do, so Colleen, when you don't sand it, does the paint eventually peel? It would really depend upon the paint. There are some paints that are going to be a little bit hardier. For a lot of the old pieces, I don't have to sand first. The paint really adheres. So if I'm using a chalk paint or I'm using a DIY, a clay-based paint, it adheres really well, and the sanding isn't always necessary. But this finish on this was definitely very slick, very smooth. So to be safe, it's definitely a piece that I would want to have sanded, or you take the lazy person's way out, which is me more often than not, and you can apply a product that is designed to stick, right? And it creates a little bit of a texture. So it goes on a little bit milky, it dries clear, which is why you can't see it. I'm using Fusion Mineral Paints Ultra Grip. I've heard there's a product called Slick Stick. There's a number of different products, different paint lines carry them, that are designed to go onto slick surfaces and create a little bit of a matte finish so that the paint adheres really well. So if you don't feel like sanding a piece, and there's sometimes that I have to sand because I'm going to be just oiling it and showing the raw wood. If you don't feel like sanding something like this that's so detailed, this is a great way to go. It means painting on a layer. It is not a primer though. If your piece needs priming, you would still need to then paint over this medium with a primer. So I've been getting a lot of questions about primers and use of primers. I don't always use a primer. I'm not using a primer on this piece. This isn't a wood that's going to bleed. Very, very low possibility of that even happening. If this was a mahogany, if this was a really old piece where you can see that it's got a lot of oils and natural tannins in it, then I would use a primer because you're blocking those from bleeding through into your other layers, especially if you're going to be painting this in paler, lighter colors. If you're going to be painting it in black, a lot of the bleed through, even if it happened, would never show. So whether you choose to prime, totally up to you. I know that there are some painters that prime every piece. They will sand every piece and they prime every piece. And they are probably going to tell you that's absolutely necessary all of the time. It's not a bad rule to follow, right? It's never going to not serve you well. It's always going to work for the piece. It's just a lot more work. And again, depending upon if you're keeping the piece or reselling, then it's adding more time onto the refinishing costs. And it's up to you to determine whether or not then your clients are going to be able to pay that additional fee. Okay? Hi, Liz. Just looking at who's kind of joining in. So this piece, it's not going to bleed through. There's no real possibility of that happening with this particular piece. It's been washed, it's been cleaned, and the Ultra Grip has been applied in lieu of sandpaper to create that rough kind of tacky surface so that my paint will adhere. Now, there was a couple of other decisions that I had to make about this piece before I decided to just jump in and start painting. One was hardware. You know, you kind of always have to figure out your hardware before you start painting, because if you're going to have to be switching out hardware, you need to know that either you're keeping the existing hardware so you can keep the existing holes, or you have to plug up the holes and sand them smooth before you start doing the paint. Now, I wasn't sure that I really wanted to keep the drop pulls in each of these 5 kind of spaces that the drop pulls were in, but a couple of issues. One, there's a molding here that's really kind of highlights this is where a pull goes. Also, it's indented, it's inset, and there is a brass faceplate for the pull that is nailed down into this. Now, I was thinking of removing that so then I could refinish it with the pull itself. but it's nailed in there and kind of glued in, and I would end up kind of gouging it out to be able to get it out. So that seemed like one, I was going to be creating more damage than not. And so what I elected to do was to leave it in place, and I'm going to paint over it. I didn't want the heavy look of too much hardware up here because there's already a lot happening up there. So all that we're going to see metal wise when it's done is the little drop pull. There wasn't another logical spot to be able to put the pulls. So this cabinet opens up asymmetrically, meaning there's 3 panels on one drawer front, 2 on another. There is no place for another knob to go because there's no real flat surface. This cabinet opens right here, right? So it opens right there. There is no place for another pull to go. So I'm really limited in having to do this. The bottom pulls, though, are really honkingly huge, right? They are very substantial pulls. And I'm thinking when I'm done, depending upon which way I go with the paint finish, and I really don't know yet, they could be way too heavy for the piece. So likely these ones I will be having to replace from the drawer fronts. They kind of work with how heavy and busy the top is, but I'm going to be lightening the top. And so I think that these ones I'm going to have to replace. I've left the holes as is because I think this is fairly standard in terms of hole size. If I'm wrong and I can't get other pulls, then I'll be going with these babies. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly okay. I'm just thinking that they might end up looking a little bit heavier than I want, but I also really don't know exactly what this is going to look like. I know some of you had chimed in on colors and looks, and I have to tell you, I have probably almost 12 paint colors on the floor beside me that may or may not make it into the finished piece. But tonight we're doing a base coat. And as much as base coating in and of itself is not all that exciting really to watch, I did want to bring you on for the beginning. One, to talk a little bit about prep. And I will be probably over the course of the weekend writing an article. So you can always go to the website, www.queenbeecreations1.com, and I will be dropping in all my prep. What do I do? What do I recommend for that? So I will do up an article for you guys. But because this one was a little bit unique, right? That I definitely needed to have that ultra grip added to the surface to take away some of the slickness. And again, because it was the dilemma of, you know, the sanding is really going to be an absolute pain with all of this carved molding in here to really be able to sand. It was the easiest solution, and I think the best solution for this piece. Now, for the base coat, I'm actually doing a bit of a two-tone base coat because there so 2 reasons. One, because ultimately it's going to be finished in multiple tones. So I could just paint a base coat all in white, but strategically I'm doing it with the 2-tone colors because it is going to give me more of an idea of where to go with this piece. So I am looking at using some green tones on this piece. And right now I'm thinking lighter here and slightly darker around these edges. Just because right now in my head, I'm thinking that some of these details, I might end up wanting to bring out more with a colored glaze afterward. And the glazing then would happen after I've done all of the waxing of the piece and allow it to sit down into the grooves. But that also depends upon where I go with the addition of some other colors once we get into some of the next coats of this as well. But I am kind of just roughly looking at getting a bit of an idea of where lightening the piece up goes, how it starts to transform it, gives me a better idea of some of the additional colors that I might want to introduce. And I've got a number of colors on standby. So I've got some blues. I've got a bit of a hand mixed blue and green color, which is lovely, which I'm thinking may go into that glaze. I do have coral as something that I might use in a couple of little areas, just as a little accent to kind of brighten it if I think that this is still looking a little too heavy. I quite honestly, I have like a cherry, a deep, rich, kind of almost Bing cherry color that I'm thinking, oh, you know what? I might want to add a little bit of richness and a little bit of depth in some of the darker areas, perhaps. So I have that as a possibility, right? But really, one of the things that you can do, and what I wanted to show you tonight, is that you can use as well your base coat to start to lay on some of the color that you're thinking of, just to help you with some of your decision process, right? And the fact that really you don't have to have everything planned out right from the get-go. You know, you might have a rough idea of where you're going with a piece. Sometimes you're going to have an exact idea of where you're going. And there's been pieces that start to finish was totally controlled. I knew exactly what I was doing. More often than not, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I have to kind of see it organically kind of take shape. There's sometimes I start out with a plan and I just throw that plan right out the window. And other times it's just following right along. Now this color is kind of a pale kind of minty green color. It's DIY. So Debbie's Design Diary paint in mint chip. The next color that I'm going to apply, so just let me unwrap my brushes. I already did the two sides and the top. The next color is also a green, and it's called Aviary. So the combination of these two, and I'm not sure if you can see, I think that gives you an idea. This is the mint chip and this is the Aviary, is definitely a deeper toned green that we're going for. Just because my brush was sitting there from earlier today. It's been a crazy day. I had hoped to get on here earlier, but life and the other job intervened. So a lot of client calls, some proposal writing, a little bit of business travel to potentially arrange for, which if I ever disappear off the map, then it's usually because I'm doing a bit of traveling for business. This piece has a lot of these deep grooves right down in there, which kind of really necessitates pulling and pushing that brush down into that groove. Now, know that the finished piece will not be this stark contrast, right? This is before we start getting into doing a lot of our color blending and merging some of the colors. But definitely, I probably will still be looking at these inset panels being a little bit more on the lighter side, because of all of the moldings and all of the carvings in there. We want to lighten that up a little bit rather than heavy it. So this will probably still keep with some of the lighter colors. This outside will stay with a little bit of the darker tone colors. It may lighten up a little bit. We might merge a little bit of the darker colors or some other brighter colors into the middle a little bit. We'll kind of see how it goes as it kind of organically takes shape. but I'm so far really liking the contrast of the two. And this was a brand new jar of the Aviary color, which is one of the newer DIY paint colors. And I just really haven't had a chance to use it yet. So I was kind of excited to get a chance to do that. If when I'm done, I think overall the piece still looks really heavy, I gotta tell you, this Aviary looks awesome with white wax. So I can still brighten the piece up a little bit and lighten it a little bit by applying some of that white wax if that's the direction we want to go. But as I said, it's a kind of wait and see. I'm thinking right now that this molding across the top I may do in this lighter mint chip as well, and then that top banding finish out with some of the Aviary. So that's the direction. So all I'm going to do for the remainder of this evening is carry on doing exactly the same. My main point in coming on tonight, one was to show a bit of a start of the direction we were going. I know there was a lot of people on the Queen Bee Creations Facebook page that were weighing in and voting on what colors to be able to use. And I spent a lot of time. Agonized over it, and I had all the paint spread out on the floor, and I was matching them up and trying to, you know, run down with paints and hold them up against the piece to see what the direction was that we would take. And it's kind of funny having to look at the colors and just maybe sort of start to envision where they might go. So I think this is going to work, but we've got a long way to go still with this piece, and quite a number of steps before it'll be finished to really be able to bring out some of the beauty, hopefully taking it from Ugly Duckling to a swan. That will be for you guys to decide at the end and weigh in and vote in on, see if I manage to accomplish that. But already you can kind of see the transformation taking place, that already it's starting to look significantly lighter and brighter, a little bit fresher, I think, and perhaps a little bit more modern. And that's really the main thing with refinishing a lot of these older pieces, is taking something that isn't appealing to the newer generations, and as they're looking at building their homes and doing their cocooning, right, and coming up with their furnishings, that if they're investing in pieces, one, I want them to be good, solid, quality pieces. This is awesome. And having that cedar lined top to this is just a huge bonus. The drawers on the insides are like new as well. So, and this is heavy. This piece, trust me, I had to carry it out of a basement. It's solid. It is heavy. So this is a great quality piece, but it's not a look, or, you know, this old finish was not a look that, you know, young people and younger generations are really looking for in their homes. So hopefully coming up with a look that makes it a little bit more modern, adds some great character and detail that you wouldn't get in certainly IKEA furniture, and that there's a plus in it for everybody else. Keeps it out of the landfills, gives somebody a better quality piece than they might be paying for otherwise, and they get something that's totally unique, one of a kind. I haven't painted something like this before, and if I got something that was similar, I would not paint it the same way again. So this is truly going to be something that someone can have in their home, and it becomes a statement piece, it becomes an art piece, it becomes a decorative item that they know is solely their own. They're not going to be walking into anybody else's homes and seeing that. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of, with some of these pieces, what goes into them prior. Helps you if you're looking at painting and refinishing some pieces, making up your mind, making some decisions about some of the prep work you need to do before you would apply any paint. Not everything needs a primer, not everything needs sanding, but don't assume that everything out there does not require either one of those things, because that would not be true. And I do know that there's a lot of painters with their paint lines that swear you never have to. No. If I found that I needed to, that I was getting some bleed through and it was creating some patchy areas, I could take a shellac product and just paint over my paint in that area and then repaint that area. So that shellac would serve as a block, but that's the only thing that blocks bleed through. So if you're using a primer, you want a primer that has that shellac, and you can get water-based shellac. You can even get it in a spray if you want to just spot spray some areas, or you can take a brush and be able to do it. I always have a big container of, if I'm using primer, I'm usually using Zinsser bin primer. It's got the shellac built in so that I don't have any worries. If I found that I was wrong about a piece and it did bleed through, then I can always add the shellac after, but then I have to reapply paint over top of that. So it does create that extra step later on. If you had a really particularly fancy finish at the time that you saw the bleed through happening, then that's going to be a lot more work for you in terms of trying to recreate that over top of that shellac, in which case maybe your decision and choice is to always prime with a shellac-based primer beforehand, just to be on the safe side. And always, that's your call. I make some strategic choices based on the amount of time that a piece is going to cost me. Because of all this detail, it's definitely going to be a little bit more involved paint process for me. There's going to be more hours added in already, and I'm very conscious of not wanting the expense of the refinishing to price it outside of what somebody might be willing to pay for it. That said, though, I don't not do the necessary prep just to save in some of the time or some of the money. I always take a look strategically at what is necessary, and then that has to factor into the process. So this didn't need priming, but it definitely needed to have that tough coat added on first to be able to give me that slick surface taken away, rough it up a little bit for me so that no problem, no issue with my paint sticking. I'm gonna be trying to come back to you over the next couple of days and try to wrap this up. I have a couple of auctions in the next couple of days where I've got bids in on a bunch of furniture, and if I get all of it, I'm gonna have to be moving through a lot of stuff really fast because my house is getting full. So one, I need to get going on selling some things and making space for some of the new items, but as well, storage on the new items. I have no more storage left either. My garage is full to overflowing, which perhaps begs the question, why am I bidding on more furniture? Yeah, short story, it's an addiction. I see them and I think, oh my gosh, I would love to paint that. And before you know it, I have clicked on bid and it's done. So I would say that I would work on that, but I probably have no intention to work on that. I like getting the pieces. I like knowing I have things in the queue, and that's part of the fun, is being able to acquire some pieces that are a little bit different. And now that I am videotaping, be able to acquire some that are going to require me to do some different techniques, to be able to show you some different things. So we'll see how that goes and what comes up after this piece. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We still have to get this one done. So I'm going to carry on with getting this two-tone base coat on. And when we next come back, we will do the next step. And hopefully by then, I will have decided what that next step is. But feel free on Facebook to jump in and let me know what you think the next step should be. So I'll try and take a pic of this in the light tomorrow, post it on the page. Check it out, chime in with some of your thoughts, your comments, and I am fully open to being influenced either way. Take care, have a great evening. See you soon.